sound of her whispered words cut through the darkness of our bedroom like shards of glass. I lay perfectly still, my back to her, breathing kept deliberately even as I listened to my wife of 7 years plan her escape from our marriage. "I love you too," she whispered into her phone, voice so soft it was barely audible over the gentle patter of rain against our bedroom window. "I can't keep doing this much longer. I'll tell him this weekend. Then we can finally be together." A pause as she listened to the voice on the other end, the voice of the man she was choosing over me. "I know it's been hard, but he's trying so hard to make things work. I need to do this right." Another pause, a soft laugh that I once thought belonged only to me. "Soon, I promise. Just a few more days. My name is Michael Bennett. I'm 35, a high school English teacher in a small town in Vermont, where the maple trees turn brilliant shades of crimson and gold in the fall, and the snow blankets everything in pristine white come winter. For the past 4 months, I've been fighting to save my marriage to Rebecca, Becca to those who love her, a battle I now realized was already lost. I discovered her affair 16 weeks earlier, a series of text messages from someone named James that appeared on her laptop when it synced with her phone, messages that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. Explicit, intimate, loving, messages that spanned back 3 months, documenting the growth of their connection from professional friendship to something that had shattered my world. When confronted, Becca had cried, apologized, sworn it was over. James was a colleague at the marketing firm where she worked in Burlington. A mistake, she called it. A terrible lapse in judgment that she regretted deeply. She begged for another chance, promised to cut all contact with him, even offered to find another job. I had been devastated but determined to save our marriage. I loved her, the woman who'd been my college sweetheart, who'd moved to this small town with me when I got the teaching position, even though it meant a longer commute for her, who knew all my flaws and had loved me anyway. Or so I thought. "We can work through this," I had told her, my voice steady despite the earthquake inside me. "People make mistakes. Marriages survive affairs, but only with complete honesty from this point forward." She had nodded eagerly, tears streaming down her face. "Anything. I'll do anything. I don't want to lose you, Michael." The weeks that followed were a blur of couples therapy, long conversations that stretched into the night, and deliberate efforts to rebuild what had been broken. I read books on recovering from infidelity, joined support groups, did everything the experts recommended. Becca seemed equally committed, transparent with her schedule, open with her phone and email, attentive and affectionate in ways she hadn't been in years. I wanted to believe we were healing, needed to believe it. The alternative was too painful to consider. There were moments when it felt real, when her laughter at one of my jokes seemed genuine, when she reached for my hand across the dinner table, when we made love with an intensity that felt like reconnection. But there were other moments, hesitations, distant looks, the way she sometimes checked her phone when she thought I wasn't watching. Now, listening to her whispered promises to another man, I understood what those moments had meant. The repair of our marriage had been an illusion. She had already chosen him. I continued my steady breathing as she ended the call, the soft click as she set her phone on the nightstand, the gentle shift of the mattress as she settled back under the covers. Within minutes, her breathing deepened into sleep, apparently unburdened by the conversation that had just confirmed the end of our life together. I lay awake until dawn, watching the darkness give way to the gray light of early morning, my mind cycling through memories, searching for the moment when we had started to drift apart, when she had begun looking elsewhere for what she once found in me. Was it when I decided to stay at the high school instead of pursuing the department chair position at the community college? When we decided to postpone having children because the timing never seemed right? Or had it been 1,000 tiny moments of inattention, of taking each other for granted, of forgetting to nurture what we'd built? Morning came with no answers, only the certainty that the weekend would bring a conversation I wasn't prepared to have. Becca woke with a smile, leaning over to kiss me as if everything was normal. "Good morning. Sleep well?" "Fine," I lied, forcing myself to return her kiss. "You, like a rock," she said, stretching as she got out of bed. "I'm going to shower, then make breakfast. Pancakes sound good." I watched her move around our bedroom, selecting clothes for the day, her chestnut hair fallen in waves down her back. She seemed lighter somehow, as if having made her decision had lifted a weight from her. Meanwhile, I felt anchored to the bed by the heaviness in my chest. "Whatever you want is fine," I said, the mundane exchange surreal in light of what I knew was coming. The next 2 days passed in a strange limbo. I went to work, taught my classes on Thoreau's Walden, with an awareness of the irony, discussing a man who sought truth and simplicity while living in the shadow of my wife's lies. I came home to dinners and conversations that felt like performances in a play where only I knew the real script. Becca was unusually attentive, almost tender, as if trying to soften the blow she was preparing to deliver. Friday evening, I sat on our porch, nursing a beer as the setting sun cast long shadows across our small yard. The garden Becca had planted in the spring was in full bloom, a riot of colors that seemed to mock the dying light of our marriage. My phone buzzed with a text from my brother David. "Still on for fishing tomorrow." I stared at the message, realizing I had completely forgotten our plans to spend the Saturday morning at the lake, a tradition we'd maintained since childhood. Before I knew my life was about to implode, before I knew that tomorrow was when Becca planned to tell me she was leaving. "Not sure," I texted back. "Might have something come up. We'll let you know in the morning." Becca appeared in the doorway, 2 glasses of wine in hand. "Thought you might want something stronger than beer," she said, offering me one as she took the chair beside me. I accepted the glass, watching as she settled in, tucking her legs beneath her in that familiar way that had always made my heart swell with affection. Now it just hurt, knowing these small intimacies would soon belong to someone else. "Beautiful evening," she commented, looking at the garden rather than at me. "The black-eyed Susans really took off this year." "Becca," I said, unable to maintain the charade any longer. "I know." She turned to me, her expression questioning but not yet alarmed. "Know what?" "I heard you on the phone Wednesday night, talking to James, making plans." The color drained from her face, her fingers tightening around her wine glass. "Michael, Don't," I interrupted, my voice softer than I expected. "Don't lie to me again. Not now." She set her glass down carefully, as if any sudden movement might shatter more than just the crystal. "You were supposed to be asleep." A bitter laugh escaped me. "That's your concern, that I overheard. Not that you were planning to leave me while pretending to work on our marriage." "It wasn't like that," she said, tears forming in her eyes. "I really did try. We both did. But you love him." I finished for her. More than you love me. She looked down at her hands, twisting her wedding ring, the simple gold band I'd placed there on a perfect June day 7 years ago. It's not about loving him more. It's about feeling something I thought was gone forever. And you couldn't feel that with me, despite everything we've been doing to reconnect. I wanted to, she whispered. I tried, but every time we seemed to make progress, I'd feel this guilt, this knowledge that part of me was still with him. It wasn't fair to either of us. So instead of being honest, you planned your exit strategy behind my back. While I was fighting for us, you were just, what? Going through the motions. No, she protested, looking up at me. It wasn't like that. I was genuinely trying to see if what we had could be saved. If these feelings for James were just temporary. But they're not. I took a long sip of wine, letting the bitterness coat my tongue. When were you going to tell me? Tomorrow, right? That was the plan, I heard. She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. After breakfast, I don't know what I thought, that it would somehow be easier if we had one last normal morning together. The absurdity of her reasoning might have made me laugh if the pain weren't so acute. One last normal morning before she blew up our life. A final cup of coffee before walking away from 7 years of history. Were you ever going to tell me about staying in contact with him? Or was that always part of the plan? Pretend to cut ties while secretly continuing the relationship. She had the decency to look ashamed. It wasn't planned. After about 2 weeks of no contact, he called me at work, said he missed me, that he couldn't stop thinking about me. I should have hung up, should have told you he reached out, but I didn't. And that one call became many, I guessed. Yes, she admitted. Lunch breaks at first, then coffee after work. Then you realized you wanted him more than you wanted our marriage. I realized I couldn't keep lying to myself. Or to you. She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Michael, I'm so sorry. You deserved better than this. Better than me. I stood up, needing distance. The porch suddenly too small. Too intimate a space to have this conversation. Don't do that. Don't make this about what I deserve. This is about what you want. Who you want. You're right, she said, her voice steadying. I'm not trying to make excuses. I made choices. Terrible choices that hurt you deeply. I just want you to know that it wasn't easy, that I didn't take any of this lightly. I looked at her then, really looked at her, the woman I'd loved for a decade, the person I'd planned to grow old with. In her eyes, I saw genuine regret mixed with something else. Relief. The relief of finally being honest, of no longer living a double life. When are you leaving? I asked, the practical question easier to voice than the emotional one swirling inside me. I found an apartment in Burlington, she said. Month-to-month lease. I can move in next week. I hoped we could talk about the house, the finances, all of that once we've had some time to process. I nodded, the logistics providing a strange comfort in their concreteness. I have plans with David tomorrow. I'm going to go. When I get back, we can talk more. She seemed surprised by my calmness, perhaps expecting anger, shouting, drama. But I was beyond that now. The shock had come days ago, when I heard her whispered declaration of love for another man. What remained was a dull ache and the practical matter of dismantling a shared life. That night we slept in separate rooms, me in our bed, her in the guest room. The house was quiet, but my mind was loud with memories and questions. I scrolled through photos on my phone. Becca and me in Maine last summer, at my parents' anniversary party, building snowmen after the big storm 2 winters ago. A documented history of happiness that now felt like artifacts from someone else's life. The next day, I met David at the lake, the familiar ritual of preparing our fishing gear and launching the small boat, creating a surreal backdrop to my personal collapse. As we cast our lines into the still water, I told him everything: the affair, the reconciliation attempt, the phone call, the impending separation. "Jesus, Mike," he said, his face reflecting the shock I'd felt days earlier. "I had no idea things were that bad. Why didn't you say something sooner?" "I thought we were fixing it," I replied, watching as ripples spread across the water's surface. "I really believed we could get past this. And now I know we can't. She's already gone, even if she hasn't packed her bags yet." David was quiet for a moment, then asked the question I'd been avoiding. "Do you think you could have done anything differently to make her want to stay?" I considered his question as a fish jumped nearby, breaking the surface with a soft splash. Maybe, if I'd seen the problems earlier, if I'd been more attentive, more present. But I think once James entered the picture, the comparison was always going to be there. The excitement of something new versus the comfort of something familiar. "That's bullshit," David said with unexpected heat. "Marriages have ups and downs. You work through them together. You don't jump ship for the first person who makes you feel butterflies again." His loyalty warmed me, but I shook my head. It's not that simple. We both let things slide, took each other for granted. The difference is, I wanted to fix it. She wanted to escape it. When I returned home that evening, the house was quiet. A note on the kitchen counter informed me that Becca was staying with a friend for the night, giving me space. Giving herself space, more likely. The coward's way out, avoiding the aftermath of the bomb she'd dropped. I poured myself a whiskey and sat in our darkened living room, the moonlight filtering through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Tomorrow, we would begin the practical discussions. Who would keep the house? How to divide our possessions? The mechanics of untangling two lives that had been intertwined for so long. But tonight, in the quiet of the home we'd built together, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had happened. Not just the betrayal, but the finality of her choice. She had weighed our history, our potential future, against the promise of something new with him. And she had chosen him. The realization brought not anger, but a profound sadness. For what we'd lost. For what we might have been if circumstances had been different. For the future I had imagined that would never come to pass. In the months that followed, Becca moved out. We put the house on the market, and divorce papers were filed with minimal drama. She and James made their relationship public, moving in together before our divorce was even finalized. I found a small apartment closer to my school, threw myself into teaching, started hiking the nearby mountains. The physical exertion a welcome distraction from the emotional weight I carried. Friends tried to set me up on dates, assuring me there was someone better out there, someone who would appreciate what Becca had discarded. Perhaps they were right, but I wasn't ready. Not yet. I needed to understand what had happened, to learn from it, before I could trust myself, or anyone else, with my heart again. 1 year after that whispered phone call, I ran into them at a restaurant in Burlington. Becca and James, seated by the window, his arm around her shoulders, her head tilted toward him in that familiar way that had once been directed at me. They looked happy, comfortable in a way that suggested they'd found something real in the ruins of my trust. Becca saw me first, her smile faltering slightly before she composed herself and waved. I nodded in acknowledgement, a gesture that contained neither forgiveness nor bitterness, merely recognition of our shared past and separate futures. As I continued to my own table, I realized something unexpected. The sight of them together no longer cut as deeply as it once had. The wound had begun to heal, leaving a scar that would always mark the experience, but no longer dominated my emotional landscape. Whether I found love again or continued on my own, I knew one thing for certain. I would never again mistake effort for commitment or silence for contentment. She had chosen him, but in doing so had forced me to choose myself, to rebuild a life based on honesty and self-respect, rather than the illusion of a love that had already slipped away. If this story touched you, leave a like to show your support, and subscribe for more whispered tales of heartbreak and hope